If you have ever found yourself wanting what your friend has or changing your preferences based on popular opinion, then this video is for you. In the next several minutes, I will unravel the unspoken, irresistible pull of imitation that guides our actions, our desires, and even our conflicts. Get comfortable as we explore. I can still somewhat recall the day my biology teacher told us all these super cool stories about mimicry in biology when I was in secondary school. The idea of a chameleon mimicking the background color of, say, a tree or a grass has stuck in my mind ever since. This is perhaps because of an inadvertent practical exposure to the concept. I was walking down to the school gate after closing hours. A friend of mine started screaming his lungs off, informing us to come see a chameleon, the animal our biology teacher mentioned the other day in class. Lo and behold, we saw this tiny animal and couldn't believe our eyes. How is it even possible? The skin color changing right in front of our eyes. We were elated, we yelled, we jumped, we screamed, and we spread the good news. We might have frightened the chameleon so bad that it never came back. But we didn't fail to suspect a couple of folks in the class who could have killed the poor animal. But mimicry isn't only for chameleons or lower animals, friends. In fact, if there is a theory of everything in nature, it will be drenched in imitation. As Adam Broughton in my earlier example, biological mimicry is reflected in Charles Darwin's work, for example, and its role in survival, adaptation, and evolution. Also, people before Darwin knew of mimicry since they were not walking around blindfolded. For example, Aristotle talks of octopus mimicking the color of stones, Pliny reported mimicry in chameleon, and so on. Why this imitation abounds in lower animals, it is superbly and distinctively unique in humans. I will explore imitation in humans via the lens of the French polymath Rene Girard. Where imitation is called mimesis. Mimesis because when it comes to humans, the story gets a little bit more complicated. At the heart of Rene Girard's mimetic theory is desire, what's called mimetic desire. Beyond our immediate needs such as food to survive or protection for safety, it is hard to say anything positive about the truthfulness of the originality of our desires. We imitate the desires of others, so desire, according to this Girardian philosophy, is mimetic. This structure gives a simple triangular framework where a subject imitates a model to acquire an object. Everything seems to be fine when the object is limitless, say, like the acquisition of language. However, it is not unusual for L to break loose when the object is limited, and many people want it. This explains the vast amount of violence in human history, which remains in many forms today. Let's see how simple mimetic desire works. Put some kids in a room with identical toys, and it's only a matter of time that you see a bunch of kids quarreling over a toy while being surrounded by unused identical toys. But it isn't all in kids, believe me. Imagine this. There's a lady who lives just around the corner of your house. Initially, you thought she was okay, not particularly outstanding. But then when you return to your school after summer break, you notice all the popular guys on campus can't stop raving about her. They are all drawn to her like a magnet. Suddenly, the ordinary girl from your neighborhood transforms in your eyes. She's no longer just okay. She's now the stunning, irresistible belle of the block. The funny thing is, perhaps nothing about her really changed. In fact, maybe one could argue she might have lost some of her charm. But because the people who are your peers now desire her, that has altered your perception entirely. You too find yourself wanting to be part of our world. Here's another example. Despite some criticism, canned laughter in shows has proven to be effective. Studies show that shows with a laughter track make people laugh more, laugh longer, and laugh more often. In fact, a 2019 study even found that others' laughter can enhance the perceived humor of bad jokes, leading to a sense of authenticity and originality in the laughter of listeners. In essence, people naturally mimic the reactions they hear. Also, the reader must notice the template of modern advertisements. One never, if at all, see a product or services advertised without a model. This template is in response to our instinctive mimeticism, say. Take this advert from Coca-Cola's 58th anniversary, for example. What the hell do you think is going on here? Many things. One of the observations is aptly presented by Charlie Munger in his almanac. He says, the brain of man yearns for the type of beverage held by the pretty woman he can't have. Here's another, showing perhaps a grandpa enjoying Coke with his granddaughter. We can go on with several modern advertisement examples, and yet advertisement presents itself as a paradox. One could say the anti-mimetic mimesis of advertising. This paradox is simply that we are sold a product on the ground of originality to be unique. At the same time, the medium itself is contaminated with mimesis, with the goal that as many people as possible buy the product. And if I must continue, I must end with an unlikely example. Mimesis does not restrict itself to glamorous scenes. On the contrary, even on a dark subject like suicide, human mimesis appears to flourish. So let's take on the Werther effect. And our story must start in 1774 when Johann Wolfgang von Goethe published the novel The Sorrows of Young Werther. The novel chronicles the tale of a man named Werther who falls in love with a woman called Charlotte. Charlotte, in turn, is engaged to another man called Albert. Entangled in a messy situation, Werther spirals into despair, further aggravated by social emulation and the marriage of his beloved to Albert. His desperation leads him to borrow 2 pistols from Albert under the pretext of a journey, but he uses them to end his life. The novel's popularity sparked a tragic trend of copycat suicides in Europe, with the book often found at suicide scenes. As a result, authorities in Denmark and Italy banned the novel due to its perceived influence on this disturbing trend. And this doesn't appear to be a false signal, as many studies have documented the so-called Werther effect. In fact, in a fairly recent paper, 2 South Korean researchers documented their empirical analysis of celebrity suicide reports on copycat suicides. It will be incredibly useful to say 1 or 2 things about the manner of ways to think about these varied examples of mimesis presented. Even though they fit into the same imitation framework, there are many significant differences. We could start with non-acquisitive mimesis. We imply here that the object of imitation is unlimited. This will be the case with canned laughter. Your laughter doesn't take away from mine. Likewise, the imitation induced by advertisement is also non-acquisitive, so is committing suicide. However, when the object or subject of desire is in limited quantity, conflict is not unusual. In Girardian philosophy, this is what is called acquisitive or conflictual mimesis. For the lady living down the street with so many men on her case, one can wager that conflict is at the horizon. If we go back to archaic societies, 3 categories of subjects and objects lead to violence, namely land, women, and livestock. This provides us with a simple and yet effective theory of conflict and violence explained by acquisitive mimesis. We want what other people want, except that we cannot all have it. There is also another circumstance where mimesis can be mediated internally or externally. Internally, where mimetic rivalry is the result; externally, where conflict does not ensue. How many of my listeners have ever found themselves constantly grinning with envy at the late Queen Elizabeth? Conversely, I'm curious about how many of you can honestly say you've never felt a twinge of envy towards a friend. Your chance of conflict with someone like the queen when she was alive, even if you so decide to imitate her, is almost nil. However, the same cannot be said should you choose to imitate the neighbor. The former is called external mediation, the latter is called internal mediation. Therefore, it shouldn't be surprising that the greatest enemies in history are found among siblings and neighbors. Internal mediation leads to mimetic rivalry, which in turn leads to conflict. External mediation is when you decide to imitate somebody too distant. The closer you are to a person, the more likelihood of wanting the same thing. Everything will be fine until there is only one instance of that thing that you both desire. If that happens well enough, conflict is at the horizon. We could delve deeper into many facets of human imitation, but I need to pause here. I must emphasize that much like animals, who depend on mimetic behaviors for survival, human civilization could not exist without imitation. How does one learn a language or assimilate a culture? In numerous discussions about this topic, a fundamental truth surfaces. That which aids you can, if not properly handled, also cause some harm.